you. I wonder if you could...
You can continue to watch this hearing live on our website at cspan.org. We're taking you live next to the U.S. House. They begin work on the rules for the debate of the fiscal 2014 budget resolution and 5 alternatives. Also today, a bill setting House committee funding. Live coverage of the House now on C-SPAN.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Elisa Lassiter Welu, Capitol Hill United Methodist Church, Washington, D.C.
Let us pray. As we begin our work today, we pause to give thanks for each world leader, especially Pope Francis beginning his tenure, for each political party, for each congressperson and all their staff, each individual citizen they represent, and all their diverse gifts and disparate needs. God, as we begin our work here today, we ask you to reveal where we may have become desensitized to struggles of your children, where we may let pride prevent holy possibilities, and where we may choose self-preservation over challenging partnerships. As we begin our work here today, remind us, God, that your limitless love overcomes our limitations, that you have a dream for your globe that surpasses our wildest imaginations, that you can work through the minutia of detailed legislation and the grand vision of this nation. So as we begin our work here today, we pray that we may do so ready to trust the lead of your tender and tremendous love. Amen and amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House's approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, I demand a vote on the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The journal stands approved.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Winstrup.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You got my list here. The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Speaker, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The American people, regardless of political affiliation, expect elected leaders in Washington to offer a plan to reduce mounting deficits and revive our stagnant economy. House Republicans agree and have offered another responsible plan to balance the budget with responsible reforms. Meanwhile, the best plan Senate Democrats can come with continues to spend more money than we take in. They call for a balanced approach, and yet their budget never balances and includes $1.5 trillion in new taxes. At least Senate Democrats have finally come around to offering a plan after spending the last 4 years on the sidelines. The President has yet to submit his budget to Congress, already 6 weeks behind his legal deadline. Budgets offer a picture of how government plans to steward taxpayers' money. The Senate asked for higher taxes, to fund higher spending, to finance ever-growing government. My constituents are tired of the cavalier and unserious approach that has become all too common in Washington. I'm pleased that the House Republican majority continues to take its responsibilities seriously and produce budgets which balance, getting us back on track to fiscal sanity and a healthy economy. I yield back.
Time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition? Does the lady seek unanimous consent? Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent?
Yes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 807 days since I arrived in Congress to address jobs, and the Republican leadership has still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. More than 12 million American families do not have the luxury of waiting on this issue. They are devastated. There are 5 students in my district who graduated from Harvard in 2011, and they're still looking for work. Think of the lost talent. It's time for Congress to understand that unemployment is an urgent national crisis. It results in lost tax revenue, higher government expenditures, and unbearable levels of human suffering. Mr. Speaker, our real deficit is unemployment. Let's eliminate this true deficit by bringing the President's Americans Job Act to the floor for a vote. It deserves a vote. Mr. Speaker, our mantra should be jobs, jobs, jobs.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor an exceptional Hoosier, dedicated public servant, and a good friend of mine, Martin Mamaw III. A man with a strong desire to help others and a man who has been a tremendous asset to the 8th District of Indiana. Martin has dedicated over 40 years of service to Indiana, the 8th District, and the Daviess County Republican parties. He's currently serving his 4th term in elected office as Daviess County Treasurer. He also has worked with many civic organizations and within the Republican Party as Precinct Committeeman, County Chairman, and member of the 8th District Central Committee. His public service and civic engagement have been a means by which Martin has improved the lives of those around him. His dedication and service led former Indiana Governor Robert Orr to name him Sagamore of the Wabash in 1988, an honor for distinguished public service. While his public service has been tremendous, Martin is probably best known for his fellowship, kind heart, and sense of humility. He has never met an enemy and is the first to extend a helping hand. I'm proud to stand here today to honor Martin's history of service and a history to which we all owe a debt of gratitude. God bless you, Martin Mamaw. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
$2,000. $2,000 is what you will lose if the Republican Paul Ryan budget goes through. What does $2,000 mean to you? For a single mom, it could mean the difference between feeding her family or seeing her kids go hungry. For hardworking Americans, it could mean the car payment or gas money or prescription drug money that you need to pay each and every month. But to the GOP, $2,000 is the amount they are taxing middle-class families in their quote-unquote new budget, the Paul Ryan budget. But not everybody has to pay more. The truth is that in this budget, if you're an oil company or a corporation taking jobs overseas or a yacht owner, you have nothing to fear with the GOP budget. Your lifestyle is totally secure. Once again, working families will pay more so the rich can pay less. For the sake of middle-class Americans, we must oppose the Ryan budget.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, next to me is a photo of Doolittle Raider Tom Griffin's memorial service I recently attended in Green Township, Ohio. Tom Griffin was an inspiration to everyone who had the honor to know him. I had the great pleasure to meet with and talk to Tom many times over the years. We shared the podium quite often at Memorial Day services, for example, and veterans events all over the community. Tom was a man who literally lived history. In those darkest early days of World War II, when Tom and 79 other Doolittle Raiders took off from the deck of the USS Hornet, they had no idea whether they would survive the day. The American people back then got a much-needed boost when they learned of the heroics that took place that day over Japan. But Tom cringed at the word hero. He felt that he was just doing what he'd been trained to do. And Tom Griffin went on to risk his life for his country for years following the Doolittle raid, culminating when he was shot down over Sicily and spent 22 months in a German POW camp. Tom recently said, "What a life I've lived." May we all strive to live a fraction of the life that Tom Griffin did. May God bless Tom Griffin. Yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American Society of Civil Engineers report card is out for the quality of America's infrastructure. And the results are a national disgrace and an embarrassment. America gets a D grade for the quality of its infrastructure. According to the World Economic Forum, we're 24th in infrastructure quality. In 2001, we were number 2, and we also had a budgetary surplus. There are 69,000 structurally deficient bridges in this nation. Every second of every day, 7 cars drive on a bridge that is structurally deficient. But the Republican budget plan that will be voted on this week cuts infrastructure spending by 32% per capita over the next 10 years. The United States Chamber of Commerce, that represents the so-called job creators, estimates that we will lose $336 billion in economic growth over the next 5 years. China spends 9% of its economy on infrastructure, Europe 5%, the United States less than 3%. Moreover, you just spent $89 billion rebuilding the roads and bridges of Afghanistan and $69 billion rebuilding the roads and bridges of Iraq. And you propose to cut infrastructure spending per capita by 32%. This is a national disgrace and embarrassment. I yield back.
Time has expired. For what purposes, gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2008, at 92 years old, Major Tom Griffin stood up at a Veterans Day event in Cincinnati, and he told his story as one of the Doolittle's raiders that attacked Tokyo after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. After managing to bail out after the attack and make his way to China, Tom returned to the U.S., deployed once again, this time to Europe, and was a POW for almost 2 years. Tom Griffin never said, "Why me?" but rather, "Why not me?" Growing up in the Depression, Tom Griffin learned to put service above himself. Over the years, I saw Tom tend to other veterans as they aged, and he was there for their final separation from service on earth. Tom Griffin has completed his earthly mission. However, the positive effects of his works will never perish. But are we worth the sacrifice made by Tom Griffin and so many others? Will history show that we treasured the gift of freedom that he handed us? We all need to commit to assure that Tom Griffin's efforts on behalf of freedom will not have been in vain. May he be able to look down at us and say, "Well done." Tom Griffin, you led a good life. You were a good man and the greatest of Americans. Thank you, and God bless you, Tom Griffin. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor today to recognize the contributions that women have made to our society throughout history. As this month marks both Women's History Month and the American Red Cross Month, I want to take this opportunity to celebrate the lasting contribution of one woman, the founder of the American Red Cross, Clara Barton. You know, Clara Barton was a true leader, a woman of poise and purpose. During the Civil War, Ms. Barton found common ground by helping everybody in the wake of disaster. She provided medical supplies to the injured, food assistance to the hungry, compassion for all. Since its founding in 1881, the Red Cross has been a reliable lifeline for Americans and the citizens of our world. Clara Barton passed away in 1912 at the age of 90, but her legacy lives on. It should serve as a reminder to women and to men that the business of helping others is a business worthwhile. To the women in my district and throughout the country, thank you for your confidence, thank you for your leadership, thank you for your compassion that has helped us move forward. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the memory of Marty Stumbaugh from Cabot, Arkansas. A hero is someone who is admired for their courage, nobility, and service to others. Firefighters have long been admired for these traits, and Marty Stumbaugh was a shining example. His life work was to serve his community as a firefighter. Marty did his job each day with a sense of responsibility and honor. In addition to serving his community fighting fires, Marty was a former Justice of the Peace in Lonoke County and Constable in York Township. Marty was president of the Cabot Professional Firefighters Association and a member of Mount Carmel Baptist Church. Family was the most important part of Marty's life. Marty loved his wife, Mindy, and their 2 children, Mason and Macy, more than life. Additionally, Marty had close relationships with his siblings, Netta, Carla, Robin, Corky, Stubby, and Stuart. Mr. Speaker, please join me and the entire community of Cabot, Arkansas in honoring the life and service of Marty Stumbaugh. Yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on National Agricultural Day, we honor the hard-working efforts of Americans, farmers, farm workers, and processors who provide our families with safe and affordable, healthy foods. As a third-generation San Joaquin Valley farmer, I'm proud to represent our agricultural way of life and that drives our economy. More than half of the nation's fruits and vegetables are grown in California. The San Joaquin Valley produces over $25 billion in gross per value a year, which creates jobs and helps feed our nation. Each American farmer feeds over 144 people, and they're doing it more environmentally safer than ever before. It's more important than ever to remind people that our agricultural economy still touches every part of our lives. Take a moment today to think about the hand that picked the tomato or the dairyman and thank them for that glass of milk. These are among the hardest working Americans that I know. Let me again thank the farmers, the farm workers, and the food processors on National Agriculture Day for your hard work in putting the food that we eat on America's dinner table. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address the serious budgetary issues facing our nation. It seems many in this town have forgotten what a budget is, so I thought I'd provide a quick reminder. Webster's Dictionary defines budget most simply as a plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures. A plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures. It's fairly straightforward and something the American people understand. Frankly, it's something House Republicans understand. Mr. Speaker, every year since I've been a member of this body, we have passed a responsible budget. Once again this year, the House Republican budget reduces government spending and gets our debt crisis under control. This in turn helps secure the future for our children and grandchildren and creates more jobs and opportunities today. Senate Democrats finally came to the table and introduced a budget. Unfortunately, it never balances, despite the fact that it raises taxes by $1.5 trillion. We're still waiting on a budget from the President, though I suspect we'll see a March Madness bracket from him before we see a budget. Mr. Speaker, Americans deserve a real budget, and I plan to continue fighting to ensure they receive one. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What's the message? The message is that Congressman Ryan's budget is not a path to prosperity for our country. Why? Because we lose with jobs. His 10-year budget destroys 2 million American jobs, according to the Economic Policy Institute. We lose with family and children, because family and children who have income below $200,000 would have to face a tax increase averaging more than $3,000 a year. We lose with seniors. According to the AARP, as they stated, the GOP budget will shift costs to seniors and end the Medicare guarantee. Removing the Medicare guarantee of affordable health care coverage to seniors who have contributed to through a lifetime of hard work definitely is not the answer. Mr. Speaker, the American path to prosperity is not for citizens to lose as we do under the Ryans budget, but to move forward as set forth in the Democratic alternatives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, a balanced approach should not be hardworking Americans give and government takes. This year, the federal government will collect a record $2.7 trillion. Federal spending will far surpass this. Continuing to increase revenue while federal spending grows with no end in sight is not a balanced approach. The balanced approach that we should pursue is a budget that balances, a budget that protects the present and builds for the future. We're presenting a budget that moves to that end and actually balances by slowing the rate of spending increases. This is a concept that the Washington elite will label as extreme, yet this is a concept that American families call common sense and do every week. American families have watched government grow and their budgets shrink. That's not right. Why is a budget balance important for the American people? The answer is found in examples that we see now going on in Western Europe. Governments that overspend and as a result underperform hurt the people that they are designed to help the most. Our budget will prevent this type of financial crisis from happening in our country. It will keep the promises of our families and seniors and protect the future of the American dream. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Chairman, request to address the House for 1 minute.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Please, thank you.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Later today, we're going to begin consideration of the Republican budget, a plan that not only voucherizes Medicare, but retains $40 billion in subsidies to the oil industry and requires approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. At a time when climate change is affecting more and more people throughout the country, the majority is committed to keeping our economy dependent on fossil fuels and ignoring the serious challenge that it represents. The $75 billion in damages from Superstorm Sandy, the ongoing drought in much of the West, including my home state of Arizona, don't seem to be enough evidence that it's time for serious action. Climate change is global. The United Nations report indicates that 3.1 billion people, because of climate change, will be in extreme poverty by 2050. If we want to make a sizable dent in the human contributions to climate change, we have to start making those responsible for pollution accountable and pay for it. This is the sort of leadership the American people are looking for from Congress. Climate change is real. It is not a problem that will go away. We cannot ignore it. We have to face it head on and not bury our heads in Canadian tar sands. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as I visited 100 businesses in 100 days last summer, the families who operate and work in those businesses were frustrated with Washington's inability to live within its means. The federal government's overspending is hurting their ability to grow. Why? Because small business owners know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. They know that the federal government overspending will come back to us in the form of higher taxes and unfunded entitlements and a weaker economy. House Republican plans significantly reduce government spending and enact much-needed reforms. Perhaps most importantly, they balance the budget within 10 years. According to a recent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, the spending restraint and balanced budget parts of the House Budget Committee plan would boost the economy immediately. It is time Washington starts being part of the solution. A balanced budget is good for the country and good for its people. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the body for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor with a heavy heart today. I am deeply saddened by the loss of life as the result of an explosion during a live fire training exercise at Hawthorne Army Depot last night, which is located in the northwest part of Nevada's 4th Congressional District. I had the honor and privilege of visiting the depot in January and meeting with the fine men and women who work there. The families of those affected are in my thoughts and prayers, and I hope for the recovery of those who are in critical condition and who are receiving medical care as I speak. The losses we have learned about this morning are painful. We have lost 7 Marines. Others are wounded. My office is in contact with the Governor of Nevada, local officials, and military command to receive updates on the situation, and my thoughts and prayers are with the community of Hawthorne. I will be leaving as soon as possible to return to Nevada to be with our grieving community and service members, and I ask for this body's prayers and thoughts for our men and women in service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Health Subcommittee investigated how the new health care law, Obamacare, is impacting job growth and worker opportunities across the country, and the results are not good. The recovery continues to be well below what we need to keep up with workers entering the marketplace. Youth unemployment remains very high, and Obamacare is showering employers with new red tape. In our hearing, restaurant group owner Tom Boucher from New Hampshire testified about his struggles. So far, he spent more than 100 hours with human resources staff trying to prepare for the law. The anticipated economic burden has delayed his plans to open a new restaurant. These are good jobs that could have been created. Obamacare is perversely discouraging companies from hiring full-time workers. Many job seekers find that they can only find part-time work right now. We need a dynamic economy creating good private sector jobs. Instead, Obamacare is forcing employers to spend more time worrying about taxes and accounting and hiring part-time employees. That's not the reform our ailing economy needs. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute, seek unanimous consent, et cetera, et cetera.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People sometimes ask why we can't find common ground. And there's an area we should be able to find common ground on, and we don't. And that's funding for the National Institute of Health, which is going to be cut in the sequestration by close to $1 billion. Now, let me tell you, there was an amendment in the Senate that tried to put funding back in the continuing resolution for NIH, and it failed on a party line vote. 54 Democrats and Independents yes, 46 Republicans no. Republicans say the reason they want to cut spending and voted the sequestration in is because we're putting a debt on the next generation. Well, let me submit, Mr. Speaker, that the research that's done at the National Institute of Health to find cures for cancer and heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's and AIDS and post-polio and cures, treatments, will affect the next generation more than this generation. We talk about the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense should be the National Institute of Health because the enemy is disease, and we need to conquer it and keep our loved ones alive and keep ourselves alive and have better cures. And we talk about infrastructure, and I support that, but the most important infrastructure is the infrastructure of the human body, and that's what the National Institute of Health works on. We should work together and fund the National Institute of Health for all of our constituents. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Montana seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Montana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Abby Helland, a remarkable young woman from Glasgow, Montana, who was recently named Miss Teen Montana International. Abby's the daughter of Pete and Allison Helland and the granddaughter of Montana's former Congressman Ron Marlene and his wife Cindy. Abby's passionate about reading and making sure that Montanans of all ages have access to books. And she's going to be working with our state schools, our libraries, and bookstores to promote reading education and to support the I Love to Read Week in Montana communities. She'll also work to install programs to send books overseas and to expand access to books for Montana's seniors. Abby's a true example of the spirit and the drive that we value in my home state of Montana. She'll represent our state well and as our ambassador to the Miss Teen International Competition in Chicago this July. Congratulations, Abby. We're proud of you. Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every budget should be viewed through the lens of the American people. The hardworking Floridians I represent want to know, does the Ryan budget put Americans back to work or back on unemployment? The moms and dads I represent want to know, does the Ryan budget put Americans back to, does the Ryan budget invest in our children, or does it ignore our outdated public schools? The small business owners I represent want to know, does the Republican budget fix our rigged tax code, or does it protect special interest loopholes? The retirees I represent want to know, does this budget protect Medicare, or does it abandon seniors in the face of skyrocketing health care costs? The answer is no. No, the Ryan budget will not put people back to work. No, it doesn't invest in our schools. No, it does not end special interest giveaways. And no, it does not protect Medicare. The Ryan Republican budget does not stand by our communities. It doesn't invest in our future. And that's why I urge my colleagues to vote no on the Republican budget. I yield back.
For what purposes, gentlemen from North Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. If I extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we teach the importance of a balanced budget to our school children, such as those we have today. But apparently this basic financial principle is not good enough for our President, who says he won't even chase a balanced budget for the sake of a balance. Mr. Speaker, to help the President find a better reason, I would suggest we examine the economic damage caused by runaway public debt. In 2011, Greece, Italy, and Portugal each amassed public debt greater than 90% of their economic output. For Greece, the debt was a stunning 165% of their gross domestic product. All three countries are now undergoing wrenching austerity and suffering through prolonged recessions and unemployment. What would this scenario look like for hardworking American families? The burden of unsustainable public debt and increased taxes would lead to higher interest rates on mortgages, car loans, and other credit. Ignoring this problem will bring a higher inflation, reducing the purchasing power of American families, and inflicting the most pain on the poor and the middle class. Mr. Speaker, we must support our families. We must support a balanced budget. Thank you. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition? Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the Republican budget that's being debated this week, and in particular to the unfair and inaccurate attack on a clean energy company that's located in my home state of Nevada. The Republican proposal refers to the Solar Reserve Project as an ill-fated venture. Had he done his homework, Budget Committee Chairman Ryan would have discovered that this cutting-edge solar project is not ill-fated, but instead has long-term contract with our state's largest utility. It has created 450 good-paying jobs for Nevadans, and it's running on schedule and under budget. The assertions being made in the Republican budget undermine the success of renewable energy programs, the jobs they create, and the investment they represent in our nation's future energy needs. In Las Vegas and across the country, Americans have made it clear that our budget should be a path forward for a strong middle class and serious investment in the next generation of Americans. Let's reject these mathematical gimmicks and unsubstantiated attacks and get to work on a real budget. Thank you, and I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks, sir.
Without objection, gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to share something that's been at my heart and will in the coming days be at the heart of my first bill introduced into the House. When members of Congress break the law, they break trust. They break trust with their colleagues, hurting our ability to work together. They break trust with the American people who sent them here, and they break trust with the Constitution they swore to uphold. I'll be introducing the Trust Act. This bill is simple. It does not distinguish between types of offenses or the possible reasons behind them. It makes clear that a member of Congress convicted of any felony will forfeit the taxpayer-funded portion of their pension. If our servicemen and women who lay their life on the line for our nation lose their pension, with the dishonorable discharge, should not members of Congress be held to the same standard? These days, with public opinion of Congress at record lows and public debt at record highs, the Trust Act is a place to start in restoring the faith in the American people to their government. I'm pleased to present this opportunity to my colleagues to restore trust to taxpayers, and I ask them to join me in this effort. Thank you, sir.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition? Without objection, gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the service and sacrifice of the nearly 5,000 coalition troops, including 28 of my brothers and sisters from Hawaii, soldiers like First Lieutenant Nainoa Ho of Kailua, or Sergeant Dyson Kariaga from Honolulu, who I had the honor of serving with, who paid the ultimate price during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Today marks the 10th anniversary of the American invasion of Iraq. And while this war has largely faded from the headlines, we must take every opportunity to learn from our experiences. There are many lessons we should learn, one of the most egregious being the serious waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer dollars, waste that was apparent to those of us on the ground as well as to outside experts. An alarming report this month by the Special Inspector General for Iraqi Construction also determined at least $8 billion of our reconstruction funds have been wasted. In Congress today, we have an opportunity to learn from that lesson. We have to pursue common sense ways to balance our budget without hurting our middle-class families, endangering our national security, or shortchanging our veterans. We must focus on our mission to serve the people who sent us here and honor our service members and their families who've made immeasurable sacrifices in the service of our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember when $1.4 trillion was a lot of money. $1.4 trillion is the amount of money the federal budget increases under the House Republican budget proposal, an average of $140 billion a year, 40% over the decade. But listening to my House Democratic colleagues, you would believe our budget cuts spending to the bone. You would believe that our federal government can't survive on a penny less than a $2.1 trillion increase. Now, admittedly, that $700 billion is a lot of money. It's 50% more than requested under the House Republican budget proposal. But it's important to remember that every penny of that $700 billion is borrowed from the future of the young people growing up in this great country today. Mr. Speaker, families all across America balance their budget. The federal government should balance its budget too, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, around the country this time of year it's known as March Madness, as the NCAA basketball tournament is about to begin. But it's March Madness in Washington as well, as the debate starts today over what kind of country we're going to leave to our children and grandchildren. Later this afternoon, the House begins this conversation in earnest with a debate over the federal budget. For the third year in a row, House Republicans will offer a budget that will balance, and this time we're putting forward a plan that will do so in 10 years. We do this by making careful cuts in spending and without raising your taxes. Unfortunately, the President hasn't submitted his budget yet, although he was required by law to do so on February 4th, and the proposed Senate budget raises taxes by $1.5 trillion without ever balancing. Mr. Speaker, the pathway to getting our country back on track begins today. Let's remember America's children and grandchildren as we engage in this important debate, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 3.5 years ago, our nation was viciously attacked when an Islamic extremist opened fire on our troops at Fort Hood. We lost 14 innocent Americans that day, 12 military service members, 1 civilian, and an unborn child. Since the attack, the Fort Hood community has seen and felt an outpouring of support from across the state of Texas and the nation, but not from the federal government. Currently, the troops killed and wounded in this horrible attack are denied the treatment, benefits, and honors granted to soldiers who are attacked overseas in a declared combat zone. The Pentagon deems this attack workplace violence rather than combat violence. This is shameful, and Americans should be outraged by the administration's refusal to acknowledge this wrong. Our troops were attacked on U.S. soil in a blatant terrorist attack, and we owe it to these patriots and all who wear the uniform to provide for them. They willingly and admirably put their lives on the line every day to protect our freedom. I urge my colleagues to pass H.R. 705, the Fort Hood Victims and Families Benefits Protection Act, and start providing the needed assistance for the victims and families of this terrible tragedy. Our troops deserve better. May God bless all who serve. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 122 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 12, House Resolution 122. Resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved to the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the concurrent resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 25, establishing the budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2014 and setting forth appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2015 through 2023. The first reading of the concurrent resolution shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution are waived. General debate shall not exceed 4 hours, with 3 hours of general debate confined to the congressional budget equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget, and 1 hour of general debate on the subject of economic goals and policies equally divided and controlled by Representative Brady of Texas and Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York or their respective designees. After general debate, the concurrent resolution shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The concurrent resolution shall be considered as read. No amendment shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, and shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. All points of order against such amendments are waived except the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall constitute the conclusion of consideration of the concurrent resolution for amendment. After the conclusion of consideration of the concurrent resolution for amendment and a final period of general debate, which shall not exceed 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget, the committee shall rise and report the concurrent resolution to the House with such amendment as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the concurrent resolution and amendments thereto to adoption without intervening motion, except amendments offered by the chair of the Committee on the Budget pursuant to Section 305A5 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to achieve mathematical consistency. The concurrent resolution shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question of its adoption. Section 2, on any legislative day during the period from March 22, 2013 through April 8, 2013, A, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. B, the chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution, to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. And C, bills and resolutions introduced during the period addressed by this section shall be numbered, listed in the congressional record, and when printed shall bear the date of introduction, but may be referred by the Speaker at a later time. Section 3, the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 2 of this resolution, as though under Clause 8A of Rule 1. Section 4, each day during the period addressed by Section 2 of this resolution shall not constitute a calendar day for purposes of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution 50 U.S.C. 1546. Section 5, upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider in the House Resolution, House Resolution 115, providing for the expenses of certain committees of the House of Representatives in the 113th Congress. The resolution shall be considered as read. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the resolution to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the House Administration, and 2, 1 motion to recommit which may not contain instructions.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for the purposes of debate only, I'd like to yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend, the ranking member from New York, pending which time I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
And during consideration of this resolution, Mr. Speaker, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, that was a mouthful as the clerk was reading through this resolution, and it was an exciting mouthful. And I'm not sure that folks actually were able to get from just the prose the excitement that is in this rule today. What this rule provides for is 2 very important things, and I'm going to take them in order of my personal passion, but they're both equally important. Number 1, this rule provides that every single member of this House, not just Republicans, not just Democrats, not just folks who are favored, not any particular category, but every single member of this House who represents a constituency back home had an opportunity to submit their own budget for the United States of America. You know, so often the problem in this town is not enough good ideas, Mr. Speaker. We don't have that problem today because every member of the House that chose to submit a budget is going to have their budget considered and debated on the floor of this House if we pass this rule today. Now, that is only 5 budgets, Mr. Speaker, 5 plus the Budget Committee's mark, because it's not easy to put together a budget. A lot of folks talk a good game about what they would do if they were king for a day, but when you try to craft your own budget, you've got to put literally money where your mouth and ideas are. And in this rule, we make in order a Congressional Black Caucus substitute budget, the Progressive Caucus substitute budget, a substitute budget by the ranking member of the Budget Committee, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen. We make in order a budget introduced by Mr. Mulvaney from South Carolina that tries to capture the essence of what the Senate is working on right now. And we make in order a budget produced by the Republican Study Committee. All of those exist as an alternative to the budget that was produced by the Budget Committee. Mr. Speaker, I have the great pleasure of sitting on the Budget Committee, and what you see here in my hand is the Budget Committee report. We produced this on March 15th. It's bound, it's published, they did a very nice job, it's been proofread, the minorities had a chance to add their views. That was March 15th that we produced this budget. But as we sit here today, with March quickly leaving us, what we do not have yet is a budget from the United States President. And I only point that out, Mr. Speaker, to say I understand that it's hard to produce a budget. I know because I produced one in this cycle. I had the great pleasure of working with a team to produce the Republican Study Committee budget and to produce the House budget. So in a time period where the President has failed to follow the legally required mandate of introducing a budget by the first week of February, I've had the great pleasure of producing 2 budgets. My friends in the Progressive Caucus have produced a budget. My friends in the Black Caucus have produced a budget. My friend Mr. Van Hollen has produced a budget. And I think it is fair that we ask in this debate why we have been denied a chance to look at the President's budget. We didn't see it in February. We didn't see it in March. Word has it now we might see it in April. It's hard work to produce a budget, but it's important work. In fact, it's legally required work. I take great pride not just that the House will meet its statutory deadline, but that we're meeting it in this very open and honest forum as this rule proposes. But the second thing this rule does, Mr. Speaker, is it provides for consideration of the committee funding resolution. This Congress doesn't have a penny to spend except for pennies that we take from the American taxpayer. That's the only place any revenue comes into this United States government. Part of that revenue goes to fund this very institution. And thrift begins at home, Mr. Speaker. Before you and I arrived in this body, Mr. Speaker, the committee process here in this House was authorized to spend $300 million a year. Now, the committees do amazing work. It's important work. Produce reports like this Budget Committee report. They do the oversight on the executive branch. I don't for a minute suggest that the work that the committee structure does isn't critical to the functioning of our republic. but every single account in the United States government has to be looked at, examined, critiqued, and reformed if we are to get our fiscal books back in order. Very first committee funding resolution you and I had a chance to vote on, Mr. Speaker, we reduced that committee funding from $300 million back in the 111th Congress down to around $260 in the 112th. Here we come down again to $240 in this resolution. In the 26 now short months that you and I have served in Congress, Mr. Speaker, this body has examined its own books and reduced its spending by 20% on committees. That is not an easy task. That's not a task that came lightly. That's a task that has taken tremendous effort by both the majority and the minority. But my question is, Mr. Speaker, if we can do it, as the American people expect us to do, what could the executive branch do? If we in the People's House can take 20% out because our constituents have demanded that we view every single dollar with an eye towards thrift, what could the executive branch do if only they would partner with us as we have begun the leadership right here in this body? None of the easy decisions are left, Mr. Speaker. The only decisions left to be decided in this budget, to be decided in this rule, are the hard decisions. We have provided in this rule the opportunity to consider every alternative that members have proposed to decide these solutions, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I encourage my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through numerous budget resolutions and campaign pledges and appearance on Sunday talk shows, the majority has made clear that their vision for America is a vision that says the nation can no longer care for our seniors, that we must halt vital scientific research, and that we should let our bridges and schools crumble because we can't afford to invest in the future. In short, I believe it is an extreme and cynical version for America, and one that I strongly reject. For more than a decade, the needs of our country were neglected while the majority led 2 unfunded wars and gave unaffordable tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, and we now have the cost for the last war in Iraq of $3 trillion borrowed. In all the discussions on the deficit and what bad shape we're in, nobody ever talks about that war and how that has kept us from rebuilding the infrastructure in the United States that cries out for it. These 2 decisions unraveled the balanced budget achieved by President Clinton and exploded our nation's debt. Now, after a decade of reckless financial management, the majority is proposing another budget that is as unserious as it is extreme. Take, for example, the field of scientific research. More than 50% of our economic growth since World War II can be attributed to the development and adoption of new technologies. Yet the budget proposes drastic cuts to research at the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, among others. As a scientist will tell you, and I am one, you cannot turn research on and off like a faucet. Across the federal government, researchers are on the brink of discoveries that could cure diseases or open entire new fields of commerce. But under the majority's budget, that valuable research will be ended, and these important discoveries will probably not be made in the United States. The majority wants to impose such cuts on top of the cuts contained in the sequester, even though the effects of the sequester are just beginning to be felt. For example, in the coming weeks, airport control towers will begin to close, affecting flight schedules and stranding travelers, and many of these towers are located in the rural parts of our country where there are no other alternatives for long-distance travel. In addition, Border Patrol agents will be furloughed, which not only affects security, but the success of our economy. According to the Congressional Budget Research Service, more than $1.3 billion a day, each and every day, in trade crosses the U.S.-Canada border. This trade is dependent upon the effective operation of our border security agents. The effects of the sequester are already impacting trade by causing backups at the border and leaving goods and supplies stranded en route to their destination. Furthermore, it is often forgotten that 5 years after I-35 collapsed into the Mississippi River, we have still failed to repair our crumbling infrastructure. Earlier just today, the American Society of Civil Engineers released a 2013 report card for America's infrastructure. They found that 1 in 8 bridges in my home state of New York are structurally deficient, and 1 in 9 bridges across the United States are the same. A very prominent engineer stated just this past week that there are bridges in major cities and areas of the United States which he would not cross for fear of falling into the water. At the same time, more and more engineers and transportation experts are warning that we will soon be too unsafe to cross unless we act. The bridges aren't alone. Everything from schools to airports to train stations and highways are literally crumbling before our eyes. Water systems in many of the major cities in much parts of the country, part of the United States, are almost a century old and almost unusable. It's inexcusable. Instead of responding to the crisis, and think, Mr. Speaker, for a moment, think of the jobs that would be created as badly as we need them to put people back to work if we could not decide to starve again our country's needs and start to rebuild the needs and put people back to work. So I think it's inexcusable. Instead of responding to the crisis that we have, the majority spent the last 2 years lurching from crisis to crisis and repeatedly introducing legislation such as today's budget legislation that guts investment in the nation's infrastructure instead of putting us back to work rebuilding the country. A telling illustration of the failed approach is that they have included the repeal of the Affordable Care Act as a central tenet of their budget proposal. During the 112th Congress, the majority held more than 30 votes, the last 2 years, more than 30 votes just to repeal the Affordable Care Act, eating up valuable time and costing taxpayers millions of dollars in the process. Despite this expensive folly, the majority wants to do it again. In order to balance the budget, the majority believes we should repeal the life-saving law and once again legalize health insurance discrimination based upon pre-existing conditions, force young adults off their parents' health insurance, and open the donut hole for our nation's seniors. And, Mr. Speaker, before we were able to pass the health care bill, 8 states and the District of Columbia in the United States considered domestic violence to be a pre-existing condition, and insurance companies were not required to cover victims. Are we going to go back to that if this repeal is achieved? The majority also wants to cut financial assistance to students in need. The budget cuts Pell Grant assistance by $83 billion over the next 10 years and allows the interest rates on need-based student loans to double in a time when we are falling so far behind all other industrial countries in the number of persons who go to college. The United States, that used to be first, now is around about 12th. By all objective measures, drastic and extreme cuts such as these can be seen as unnecessary cruelty not needed to balance the budget. Indeed, this weekend, just this past weekend, both Speaker Boehner and Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan said on Sunday television shows that this nation does not face a debt crisis. When asked about it yesterday, Chairman Ryan indicated that, yes, he had said that. So despite saying that to everybody, scaring America half to death, keeping business from being able to plan the future, they continue to promote a dystopian vision of the future in order to convince Americans that we have to adopt their extreme policies today. It is under this guise that the majority proposes their most extreme transformation of America's social safety net in today's budget. And once again this year, the majority proposes to end Medicare as we know it and turn the promise of guaranteed health care into a voucher program. Unlike Medicare, the majority's voucher program would not guarantee the seniors access to the health care they need. I think we thoroughly discussed that last year when it failed, and certainly during last election when it failed, which would drive senior citizens into the market with a defined income that they could use to buy their own insurance if they were physically or mentally able to do so. This is the same failed proposal, and it has been opposed by Americans, as I said, at the ballot box. But we continue today to defy the wishes of the American people with a quest to end Medicare as we know it, and it should be a telling reminder of where priorities lie. These extreme cuts stand in sharp contrast to the tax reform contained within their budget. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, in order to enact the majority's tax reform and to not increase the deficit, middle-class families would have to pay $3,000 more a year, and the wealthiest Americans receive a $245,000 tax break. Once again, the majority has shown they would rather take away vital programs from our nation's most vulnerable than raise a single dollar in taxes on America's wealthiest citizens. Mr. Speaker, such a budget is neither original, serious, nor acceptable to the American people. We've been down this road before, and it is discouraging and dangerous that the majority insists that we go down it yet once again. I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose the majority's budget proposal and today's rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds just to refer the gentlelady to the House Budget Committee report. If she were to read just the first few pages, she would see that spending increases under this budget by $500 billion in the next 5 years and $1.5 trillion over the next 10. I promised myself I would count how many times we heard the word extreme cuts applied to what is a $500 billion in new and additional spending, but I confess I've lost track already today. But with that, I'd like to yield 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker, to the chairman of the Rules Committee, a man who crafted this rule that has allowed all ideas on the budget to be considered today. That'd be the chairman from Texas, the gentleman, Mr. Sessions.